Welcome to the Missouri Valley's Mobilizing Voices for Change. I'm Kelly Burke, and joining me tonight is a familiar face for Missouri Valley fans. Derrick Docket is the former MVC Associate Commissioner for New Media and Technology, and currently he is Director of Marketing for the Wentzville School District. Derrick, great to see your face. Great to catch up. I'm looking forward to this. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's good to see you again, Kelly. It's definitely been a change of pace for me not being there, and especially in the thick of basketball season. I definitely keep up with everything, of course, as people probably know from following me on Twitter, but I definitely still keep the Valley close at heart.
We certainly miss you, but we are glad to see you thriving, and you have some exciting news, which I'm sure you'll share later in this podcast as well, just some personal news. So let's start though with current events. We are taping this about a week after the Capitol protests. Wherever you were, however you found out, what was your reaction when you actually started to witness exactly what was going on?
I was at work. I was at my desk. I actually have this routine when I am doing projects in my office that I have an earbud in one ear, and I'm either listening to a podcast or local radio or something like that. And I was listening to actually a stream online, and they broke in with news, and I was like, wait a minute, what is this really happening? So I switched it over to YouTube and picked up some live streams from some news agencies, and then was kind of just sort of like stuck, kind of like, is this really happening? Is this going on? And I'll admit I was distracted for a good amount of time. I was not getting everything done that afternoon that I wanted to get done, and we started discussing it in our office. I share an office space with 3 other people, and was just sort of just in disbelief of what was going on, because it's not something I've ever experienced. You talk about historical things that have happened, and we've experienced September 11th and all kinds of things, and you think the Washington D.C. be one of the most secure places, and something as unfortunate and tragic as that would never happen, but it did, and it just sort of was. It made me pause a lot. And I came home that evening and still took it in a little bit, and was just sort of like, okay, now what? And just sort of like, I realized I'm on the peripheral of it. And that's sort of how I approach politics. I stay informed, but I tend to sort of keep things close to the chest. But yeah, it was surprising and shocking, and as I'm sure it was for a lot of other people too.
It's obvious coming out of that moment that we're a country right now that's really deeply divided. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I text a friend that question all the time, and I'm typically a glass half full kind of person. I always like to look for the positives in things, and I try to talk him off the ledge. I'm like, hey, at some point we'll get through this. I mean, this country's been through things in the past, and we found our way. And as divided or as stressed or as dark as times may seem, there's always some way that we navigate through those rough waters, and we come out of it, and we find something positive in it, and we find something positive to grab hold of and go forward with it. So I'm still hopeful in this situation that'll happen. It's kind of tough to see, because you see how people feel right now and what they believe, and you think to yourself, I'm not sure how we go forward, but I truly do think there will be a way forward through this. I don't know how, but at the same time, there will be a person, there will be a figure that that may rise above this, that becomes a figurehead and someone that helps unify people. We have yet to see who that person could be identified as, but maybe that's a situation that happens. Maybe there is something externally outside of all this that then unites the country and then brings us back together. I mean, anything, definitely anything could happen, because we never knew we'd get to this point as a country. But hopefully something positive that we don't see happening could come out of it too.
I like and I appreciate your optimism. The Capitol Police have been under a lot of scrutiny for their handling of the protesters who breached the Capitol,
Yeah.
specifically the lack of force that was used on those specific individuals that were looting and rioting. What interpretations can be drawn from that day and that handling?
Well, man, honestly, I think it's going to depend on perspective because I mean, I obviously I'm on social media a lot, and you see one person's perspective of how they thought police handled it, and they may have thought, man, they showed great restraint, and they did because there was not. It could have been a whole lot worse. There could have been many more lives lost, and no one wants that. But at the same time, you know, any other police force, how they handle a situation like that in another community. And that's what I saw. And that was one of the takeaways where it's like, wow, when someone's protecting peaceful protesters in one situation versus armed protesters in another situation, is there a double standard? Is there, are they looked at the same way? Is it an apples to apples conversation? I, for one, am definitely thankful that there were not many lives lost. It's unfortunate that there were lives lost, and I've read that, and it's not great. You don't ever like to see that. But at the same time, people are people. I mean, we should all care for each other as best we can and not take our lives for granted, regardless of where you come from or where you live or whatever it might be. So I look at it as they're trying to do a job, and you hope that they all have great intentions of doing their job. Um, but at the same time, man, you just think, is there a bad apple in the bunch? I mean, I don't know that, but I put faith and I put trust in those people to do the right thing and protect lives, just like I put faith and trust in my local police department to do the right thing and protect lives of the innocent. So it's tough. It definitely is, especially being a minority, a person of color, and you see some of the different things out there. But yeah, it's perspective. I definitely want to make sure I say that because my perspective is, wow,
Yeah.
would it have been the same? Like that's the one thing I took away. Would it have been the same?
I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's a very valid and fair point and for fair way to feel. That's certainly something I've talked about in the last week with a lot of my Black friends who are feeling the same way. And obviously, their experience, specifically with police, is different than mine as a white woman. But how fair is it to make comparisons to the handling of BLM protests from the summer and any perceived disparity in the use of force from one event to the other?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll preface that by saying, for one, I've never been out protesting anywhere. I haven't been on those lines. I'm sort of, like I said, I'm sort of a stay informed, take it in, and I think people that know me, I'm not a boat rocker. I definitely am someone that likes to keep a wider perspective. But the one thing I definitely wanted people to know, especially for me, someone that grew up in the city of St. Louis and then went to high school in the suburbs, and now here I am living in the suburbs after going to college in Springfield, Missouri. I've seen a big wide gamut. Like my life hasn't been one where it's just been one side or the other side. I have a little bit of a wider perspective. And it's more of, are people listening to each other? Like we can talk and we can talk and we can talk, but are the people that are doing lots of talking, are they listening to the other side? And the folks that they're talking to, are they listening? And when I say listening, I don't mean just sitting there and, yeah, I'm listening to you. No, actively taking in emotions and information and perspectives of how they feel. So going back to your question, yeah, it's tough, and I don't know how you could rightly portray it in one way or the other because again, people's perspectives are different. I can't sit here and say I know how people in Ferguson, for example, feel because I didn't grow up there. I'm familiar with that neighborhood and that area of St. Louis. I grew up in North County, but I wasn't there. I lived way out in the suburbs in a different county. So I can't sit here and say I even know their perspective. I've managed to, work my way up through a career and a job, and I look at things in a different light. Those folks are struggling, and they struggle a lot. And I feel that because my family, as I was growing up, I saw the similar struggle. Um, I'm I'm thankful that my family saw it where it wasn't more of, you don't have to do this. You could be set up to do something special and great,
Mhm.
and that's the way it always has been from generation on. And I'm the youngest of a generation, and I'm thankful for, like, I've got a whole collection of aunts, and they're like four different moms outside of my mom. And they constantly tell us, you don't have to be that. You could set yourself up for more than just being, what you see and settling. So I'm rambling here, but it's a long way of saying, like I said, again, perspective. And it's just a different for everybody.
Yeah, no, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there's not really a right answer to that question. It's like you said, it's just what your own experiences and how your own experiences have shaped that, because everybody's side is valid.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of gray area right now between the battles and divide we are all facing. Just because you support the message of Black Lives Matter doesn't mean you can't support the police. Just because you're Republican doesn't mean you're not against racial injustice. There are a lot of truths that we are trying to make mutually exclusive, but they aren't, and they don't necessarily need to be. How do we reconcile that and find a common ground?
Well, for one, it definitely goes back to that listening thing. Um, I often wonder, my wife's grandmother grew up in the era of the struggles of, minorities having the right to vote, and just everything that they dealt with, like everything from a civil rights perspective. And she to this day talks about some of those stories, and it makes me stop and think, because when I sit and I think about, man, like voting, for example, and you think, oh, what a lot of the talk in 2016 and 2020 was, picking the lesser of two evils, or I'm not going to vote because it doesn't matter. Well, I sit and think, and I hear from someone that fought, that was out and in that era of, we didn't have the vote, but we fought for it, and we got it. I feel an obligation at that point that I need to go out and vote, because of knowing that there were people before me that fought for me to have that right.
Yeah.
Um, Man, I don't know. I struggle a lot, because I'm someone that looks at it from both sides, but I
Mhm.
understand where I come from. I understand where others come from,
Mhm.
but I don't know if others truly do understand. And that's why I appreciate the project here that the Valley's doing,
Yeah.
because it can share that perspective of, oh, so that's what they're doing. That's what they dealt with. Um, just simple things like that could help, shed light and inform, because it comes in all different shapes, sizes, shades of gray, shades of brown. Um, Me, someone that lives in the suburbs, that's an African American, versus someone that lives in the city,
Mhm.
versus a rural white American, versus you yourself. I mean, it's all different. All we're all different, have different perspectives of it. But I don't know truly if people understand that, and if they're willing to understand it. Um, yeah, I don't know. Your questions are great, and like I said, I'm rambling, but
No, I think, but
these are
you're
these are
making good
things.
points.
Yeah, they're just things I think often about, but you don't know, because these kind of types of conversations are difficult for people to have.
Yeah.
And to have a willingness of people to discuss them is really important. Um, but like I said, at the same time, you just wonder if people really do truly understand and feel the emotion and uh, the background of what people have dealt with in their past to get to where they are.
Mhm. Let's dig into the willingness for a second. And I'll just use myself as a personal example because that's what I can specifically speak to. My family, there's people on both sides. So, I have family members and relatives that voted for both candidates.
Sure.
And I think that's probably, it's natural for some families. So there's these completely opposite sides, completely different sides. And going back to the willingness thing, how does someone like me, with when I'm speaking to a family member or a relative that is on the opposite side of what I believe, or how I voted, how do I get them to be open to listening to the other side? That's the biggest thing that I found, is that I'm open to listening to both sides, but I don't think at heart a lot of people are. And that's been the biggest challenge that I've had as a white person, is getting people in my own family, some of them it's not an issue at all, getting them to listen to different sides, but some of them it's really hard to get them to listen to something that they may not agree with.
So before I answer that, I don't want to throw another question back at you, but
Sure.
remember before the political landscape sort of became so volatile to where we are now, talking about politics wasn't always something that was so open, or so, it wasn't always a thing. Like, people weren't always willing to say, I know who I'm voting for, I'm voting for this person. And granted, social media has done a lot of that. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
people now, that's how they show their support for candidate A or candidate B, is, they show their support by retweeting because they want to help the fundraising cause or whatever it might be. But in the past, and there wasn't a big thing. Like, you didn't sit around at Thanksgiving talking about politics or talking about what was happening in the country, because I don't want to say it was taboo, but it just wasn't something that was always done. You just sort of, you voted, and you said you voted, you moved on. Some of that still exists. I mean, me and my coworker, sometimes, it comes up and we talk about how disappointed we are where the country is. And we may have say, I don't mean to offend you, but, and you say how you feel in a little, very soft spoken kind of way.
Yeah.
But you figure out how people feel. So how to get people to listen? And they've got to want to.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to have an open mind. If they don't, I mean, you're fighting an uphill battle. That's just the honesty of it. But at the same time, there's the respect factor. And that's something I think a lot of people don't get, is that you can want to share your thoughts and your perspective with people, but doing it in a respectful manner, that's what's gotten me. So, like, I'm not a political person at all. Like, I don't, my Twitter feed is clear of politics. But when people want to talk about it, like resorting to the name calling, resorting to calling one side this or the other side that, well, that's just not helpful. And the discussions can be civil. Like, for example, what would probably happen in a college classroom talking about political science? I guarantee there are civil discussions happening about politics in several different settings. Well, we've got to find those kinds of settings. It's sad when you hear people, they say, I talk politics at family gathering or whatever it was, and now I don't like Uncle A or Uncle B, or I'm not Facebook friends with them because they're sharing things. That's your family, though. I mean, that's your family. That's disheartening, but it's a two-way street. I think it goes with respect and restraint, and open-mindedness. Um, I can honestly say, in my lifetime of voting, I've never voted single party in, a presidential election, a governor's election, a mayor, you name it.
Yeah.
I'm a mixed bag.
Yeah, me too.
For various reasons, because you vote with how it would affect you. I mean, different elections mean different things. And on elections, definitely, I want to tell people, when I talked about my story of talking about my wife's grandmother, the right to vote, voting is important. No matter who you vote for, people should know voting is important. And going the next level to that, voting in your local elections are important, because that affects your day-to-day daily life even more than voting in a presidential election. So definitely, if that's my public statement, if that's my PSA for coming out of this, it's that. But again, it's the open-mindedness. It's a two-way street. Hear where they're coming from, and they'll hear where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Even if you think their point is nonsense or it makes no sense or they're closed-minded, you know what? I can almost guarantee you, and this, I would take politics out of it. When I've had a discussion with someone about, you know, a graphic design idea or a concept, a creative concept, I hear their point of view, and I may take some things away from it that, oh, that's a great idea. And I'm going to merge that with my idea. Oh, what do you know? We came together, we collaborated and found something. What's to say that that couldn't happen in this scenario? So I don't know if we can ever get, again, can we get back there?
I hope so. I mean, you know, and I should clarify too, when I try and broach these conversations or encourage, you know, these conversations, I'm not doing it with the intent to change the other person's mind. I'm just doing it, asking them, would you consider listening to this? And it doesn't even have to be, you know, these podcasts for the Valley, for this OneValley Initiative. It doesn't even have to be something that I put out. Just have a conversation with somebody on the other side, or find something you can listen to on the other side, and just listen to it. And then,
and you know, the other challenge with that is what I said earlier, they're difficult conversations. And sometimes people don't like to have those conversations because they're afraid of what comes out of it. But what I've learned, and we've done some of this in the school district where I work, we started having that. And I'll preface it by saying, I work in a school district where there are a lot of minority students and minority staff. But we're adults. You can have these things in a civil manner, especially when you realize it's for a greater good. So open-mindedness, you know, make it a two-way street. And just, you know, my thing is, if I can show them respect, they'd be more willing to show me respect and share the time and share the space, and hopefully something positive would come out of it.
What role does the mainstream media have in contributing to the divide in this country?
Definitely part of it, because I mean, obviously people get their news from lots of different places. I am someone that I tend to take it in from lots of different places in a lot of different ways. I'm a social media person, of course, so I definitely, you know, I see a lot of it. It's a lot of noise. And you've got to just take a step back, you know, and I think that is one of the problems. You know, we've got different perspectives and different news agencies that may skew one way or the other. I wish people would think a little bit more critically of, you know, what they're taking in and how they're taking it in, and then what it means to them. Just because Network A says it, that doesn't make it the gospel. And just because Network B says it in a different way doesn't make theirs the gospel. And I think that's part of, it's part of the problem. I mean, I'll just say it's part of the problem. I I would hope that we can figure out a way, and this is probably going to be more just for the future. This is more for our young adults. Critical thinking, so important. I mean, being able to look at information and decipher it and look at it from a various different, you know, different places and making sense out of it. I don't know if people do enough of, you know, finding it out for themselves. And social media is part of the problem, because we want information, we want news right away. We don't have a lot of time. We're moving in a faster paced time here now. And it's easier to hop on and get on Facebook and you see something that's shared by someone that you like, someone that you respect, a family member, whoever it might be, and you take it and you run with it. Well, pause. I mean, we're sports people here, and you know, if we see that, you know, Bradley beat Northern Iowa 74-54, Well, it's a score. It's a fact. It is what it is. There's not another network that's going to report, hey, Northern Iowa beat Bradley 64-62. And, it's not going to be a skewed, it's fact. And it's black or white. Well, we don't live in a black and white world with the rest of it outside of sports, and it's shades of gray. So it's that critical thinking piece. And that's something I've said to friends before. I'm like, man, I hope our young adults, our youth can do that effectively and can do it with a more discernible eye, because social media is a thing. Now, the generation has stepped away from Facebook. They're using other digital platforms. So I don't know if that'll, we'll start to see that trend change a little bit. But yeah, it's not a good situation because you've got, money driving it and personal interests driving it. It's just not helpful.
Yeah. Well, and going into the social media thing for a minute too, I read something the other day. When you think about it, social media, you look at the algorithm, a lot of, let's take Facebook. The algorithm is feeding you stuff that most of the time you're agreeing with, you're liking posts. And so you're seeing over and over again, a lot of times stuff that you agree with. So you're not seeing stuff
Yep.
necessarily from the other side. It's just feeding you sort of what you want to hear. And that's the algorithm. And so
Absolutely.
that's part of the problem.
Yep. I recently took a step back from Facebook, and I still have the account, but I don't have it on my phone. And it was more of, I don't manage an account that I need to be on it checking for comments all the time. So it was a good way for me to back away from it. Now I still use it because I want to keep up on friends' birthdays, and that's an easy way to do it. And there are other things I go on there for. But I realized my feed, and I'm glad you said that, because literally my feed is full of sports clips and like funny videos and yard work videos, because those are things that I've clicked on in Facebook in the past, and it's made an algorithm for me.
Yeah.
It's not full of even one side of the aisle politics or the other, because I don't click on political things on social media. So that's one thing. Like it's a feed for me. I shudder to think with someone else's feed that they have been clicking those things left and right or commenting. They're engaging with them.
Yeah.
That's the more troublesome part, and that's the challenging thing to see if we can sort of figure out of how we back away from it. And you don't know if you let the platforms, you don't want those folks to make those decisions for us, but I mean, are they going to have to, just to clean it up? And then you start talking about First Amendment. So it's a whole thing, but you hope that, again, the critical thinking piece, can we figure it out for ourselves and look at it with a little bit more discernible eye?
Yeah. When you worked in college athletics, you worked in a world on the administrative side that is largely white in Division I. What were your experiences as a Black man?
Very interesting. And I say that not even thinking of the race part of it, because I'll be honest, I didn't really exactly know what I was getting into. I just sort of knew, like, oh, I know all about the Valley, and I know all about Arch Madness and all these things. And this is a dream job. Like I'm designing these things with logos, and like I'm a huge college basketball fan. And then the administrative side and the behind the scenes you'll learn about, and you're like, oh, there's more to this just than just sitting there watching a basketball game. And I say that in a way of respect, because it's legitimate hard work. It's legitimate hard work, and the hours and the demand. But to answer your question, it was unique because I never really thought about, doing it as, being an African American, or, just I'm in this role. And it was just sort of, I know my talent, I know my skill. I want to do the very best I can to make the Valley and the member institutions look the best for the public, and do what I can to help promote the brand. Now, over time, and I will say it, probably more because it was pointed out to me. Again, my personality, I don't tend to look at the negative. I don't tend to look one way or the other. I tend to not be a boat rocker. I'm a glass half full. But when people say, you know, oh, well, you're the guy that does it for the Valley, I had no idea. You're so professional. Like, I'm so professional. Like,
What?
yeah, you're like, I'm not sure if I should take that in a great way, or am I not supposed to be professional?
Yeah.
Like prime example, when people find out I was the one tweeting for the Missouri Valley Conference, it's like, yep, that's me. It's like, oh yeah, and it really didn't really hit home until I started putting myself on video
Yeah.
when I started doing interviews with coaches and student athletes. Uh, it was kind of interesting. And then, like, again, nothing negative, but you can tell from people's expressions or from their face of, oh, didn't expect that, didn't know. But again, it's not it's not an industry, it's not a landscape where there are lots of minorities that are in that role.
Yeah.
That trend is it's definitely improved since I've moved on, especially from the leadership role. I mean, look at the Valley alone and the AD chair. I mean, that position alone has seen more minorities that have been elevated there. But I never looked at it in a way that was, I'm one of few, until you start having those interactions.
Yeah.
But it never bothered me.
Yeah.
I was more proud of anything because I was doing it for the Missouri Valley Conference. I knew all about it. I knew lots of history, not as much as Mike Kern and Jack Watkins, obviously, but nothing was going to stop me from doing the job that I knew how to do. So for me, it was just a matter of how could I be better than another conference? How could I set us apart from what Conference B is doing and do it differently and more creatively? And now, and again, to put the positive light on it, over time, when I was more out and about and on video, people came, oh, he's the Valley's guy. He's awesome. Like, I'll never forget when Creighton left the league and the Big East was getting on its feet and didn't have a staff, that were Creighton fans that were tagging my personal account in tweets saying, Big East, hire this guy, hire this guy. I'm like, oh,
Nice.
thanks. That's interesting. But so yeah, I mean, again, I just wanted to be known for the work that I did, not the work that I did because of, I'm a minority doing the work. That shouldn't matter. Just the same way as I know there's a movement with females in athletics. Shouldn't matter. If you can do the work, you can do the work.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that, some of the comments you mentioned, they're meant to be compliments, but it's the present, and they're not even meant to be offensive.
Right.
But it's just the presentation of how they're delivered. And I obviously can't relate exactly to what you're talking about, but I'll give you an example. I used to get a lot, especially when I was early in my career. Oh, you sure know a ton about sports for being a girl. And it's like, okay, I think that's a compliment, but like, right. What exactly are you saying there?
Exactly. And again, people I'm certain they don't mean harm by it,
they don't.
but they get caught in the moment. Like, and this was one, again, and I want to stress, this was one incident where I was, what was I doing? Oh, I literally was at Arch Madness and I was going through the concourse trying to get pictures and things like that. And I'd go up to the top and do this and that. And, people would find, I walked around with my name badge and you look important and everything. And I ran into a fan and said, hey, and it's sort of like, it happens. And the conversation happened. And it was sort of like, yeah, that probably didn't go the way that he wanted it to go. But it's okay.
Yeah. The Missouri Valley Conference, as we talked about earlier, started the OneValley Initiative this summer to attack systemic racism, to promote diversity and inclusion, and to advance equality for everyone. As someone who formerly worked for the conference office, how important is the league prioritizing this message and turning it into action?
It's very important because it takes it into more of a leadership voice. And when I say leadership voice, I don't mean like a person. I mean the conference office acting as the leadership voice,
Mhm.
and the member institutions being able to rally together behind it and help push that message. Um, the conference office is the structures, the governing, the presidents, they're the governing body, and you have all your committees. And I think back to one of the committees being SAC, the student athletes themselves. And that was always one thing that I always appreciated being a part of. I go to their meeting and I hear their voice
Mhm.
and hear how they feel about actions that the ADs or the presidents would take. And their voice meant something in the Valley because guess what? We're here for the student athletes. Like, I know that term in college athletics gets used a lot, and some people say, yeah, for the student athletes. The Missouri Valley actually does its very best to do it for these student athletes. Like, that's evident. When I was there, we did surveys and things like that, and the student athletes, the coaches, the administrators all had a voice. Um, and this is sort of in a similar fashion, that voice. Um, I sort of think back, and I remember being able to sit in the administrator meetings and talking about the different staffs across the league about diversity and hiring practices, and being able to find candidates for coaching or on your staff, like, and not just in coaching positions, and just other staff positions in college athletics, because diversity isn't just about, well, we have to have someone to do this. Diversity is about perspective. It's about, bringing someone that could benefit you because they bring a different perspective. Um, and I've always appreciated that because, man, I don't know if people realize when I was working at the Valley, like, I pretty much had, like, I had it great. Like, I had almost free reign to sort of do my job with, no handcuffs. And oh man, I made a few mistakes, definitely. Some questionable things may have gotten tweeted out and whatnot. But, you know, it wasn't like run this by me before you do it. It was, we trust you, we know what you can do
Mhm.
what you can do. Um, so that was what I was tasked with, as I'm sure several others have that same boat in other institutions, other conferences, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
Um, but I think what people miss out on the benefit of having people from different backgrounds, not just minorities, not just African American, but all across the spectrum of what they could bring to the table. Um, I will tell this interesting story, and I'm not sure if folks at the Valley even know it or remember it, but before I even got hired there, gosh, back in 2000, this might be 2003 or four. I had graduated college in 2002, December 2002, and I had a job. I came and worked full-time job, and it was just a get out of college, find a job so you can start to pay bills for yourself kind of job.
Yeah.
And then about 10 months later, I found a job that was more with my degree, and I did that for, actually, before this was before that. That was so in that between era, the time frame of that job, that get out of college job, I'm like, okay, I've got to do something different here. I drove down to 1818 Shoto
Mhm.
and knocked on the door and said, hey, I don't know if you guys are hiring, but I'm really interested. I love sports. I'm a Missouri State grad. Here's my resume. And I'm almost certain that led to nothing. I'm almost certain I just sort of dropped it off and was like, I have no idea. Don't know if they actually have openings, but it's a place I wanted to work.
Yeah.
And I just, that's what you want to do. And it wasn't until that was like what, 2003, 7 years later, 2010, that I actually do see a legitimate job opening that I applied for, and the rest is history. Um, but I don't know if when people see a resume and they see a name, what do you know? What do you think? You don't know who's behind that unless you look them up, unless you do the research. Um, and that's one thing that I often do give pause about, in the job search for people. Because I hear from folks all the time, like, I'm applying for jobs and I want to work in college athletics. And I know you have the background. How do I get a foot in the door? And I often think like, man, when I was like, when I had my periods in life of looking for a job, do people look you up and do they actually see, or are you just a piece of paper? And if they do look you up, are you dismissed because you're a person of color? I often wondered that. And, again, I always tell myself I'm glass half full, but that can't help it but to have that sneak into my head.
Yeah.
But the diversity piece in college athletics, it's so crucial. Because think about the student athletes. Think about the number of student athletes that are of minority, of African American descent, or any other minority, not just African American.
Yeah.
They're the ones on the field, on the court, performing for the uniform that represents the team and represents the conference. But on the flip side of it, are there people that look like them that represent them in the administrative space, that understand when they have a challenge, someone that they can talk to? That's one thing that I always sort of wondered about. And that's why I'm appreciative of there being more of those voices in the AD chair at the Valley. You see more administrators like that, and hopefully that can continue to grow.
Yeah. You work in education now as director of marketing for the Wentzville School District. There obviously have been numerous challenges presented by COVID for schools, for teachers, for the students, and for their families. What would you want people to know about the role of education when it comes to navigating a global pandemic, navigating race and social justice, and navigating domestic terrorism?
Oh man, that's a loaded question, because my perspective in these last 3 years that I've been in my position, I'm not a different person by any means, but being around even younger, like it was great. Like I really appreciated getting to know student athletes and going to this, like I said, going to the SAC, the Student Athlete Advisory Committee meetings. And that was one thing that I just sort of was like, man, any way I can help that group, that's great, because I love interacting with them. And that's translated for me now that I've been around high school kids and I'm doing something unique that for us, it's not something that a lot of school districts have, someone in my position. So I'm super grateful for the opportunity. I'm super grateful to sort of make just a very small difference, because it blows me away. Like the simple thing of me showing up at a basketball game with my camera and the kids get super excited. But it's not just about me showing up there to take the pictures. I do it because I want to be supportive of them. I do it because my role as director of marketing is to have businesses interact with our district to see the special things that are happening and use that as a promotional tool that in the end of it can financially benefit what our kids need, what our kids would like to do to help them, have things that they may not be able to get. In the pandemic, it's been interesting. I've seen a lot of different sides of people, some that have handled it super gracefully, some that have handled it really, really well, some that have struggled. And you do your best to help those that are struggling. You do your best to say, hey, guess what? We're here for you and let us know what we can do. But then you have those that, they got to have it their way or the highway, but you still have to show that grace. You still have to show that their kids being in your school building, it matters. You're doing what you can to take care of them. So it's been a challenge, and I'm saying that as someone I'm not a classroom teacher at all, but I do know that I've sort of built these relationships that I can assist in a small way with a few of the classes because of my background, because of my experiences. And the kids have an interest in it, especially like you'd be surprised how many kids say, you worked in sports? Why'd you quit? That's a great job. And it's like, well, it's ease up now. Don't make me feel too bad. But being able to share the story, being able to share the background, and hopefully to set them up for success, to want to have a career in graphic design or college athletics or whatever it is, they sort of have someone that they can talk to and ask. So part mentor, part marketing person, part graphic design assistant. It's been a couple of different roles. The social justice piece, it's been interesting from the standpoint of I haven't had a ton of interaction with kids about that. It's been more about our administrators, our principals. I'm really honored that our district is taking a little bit more of a role to talk about diversity, to talk about how we could be change agents for the greater good, so that kids know it's not just all negativity in the world, and there are ways to find the positive in people despite what you see on television or read on social media, because we know kids are all over social media. That's all they do all day long. And they may be on a different profile, but guess what? They're seeing the same things. How we communicate with them is what's super important. And those conversations have been starting with our administrators. I was part of a virtual meeting, and they put us into breakout groups online, and we're talking about our backgrounds, and I'm there with one of our other administrators and one of our other principals, and it was almost like a get to know you session, because even though I've been there for 3 years, I know pretty well our principals, and those are the folks I interact with the most, especially at the high school level. But they didn't know my complete background. They didn't know that I grew up in this part of town or that part of town, and where I went to college and what my experience was. Well, everyone knows where I went to college, but what my experience was at college.
Yeah.
And we get to talk about those things. And they asked me how I felt and what it's like. And they say, man, I didn't know it was like that. And then that goes back to that listening piece, that perspective piece. So again, they are not easy discussions, but man, our administrative team is so awesome. And it's great. And that's one thing I'm married to a teacher too, but people that care about other people's kids that are not theirs, that's a special breed of person. And my level of respect for educators at all levels, K-12, college, university, you name it, technical school, my level of respect for them is on a totally different level now, because of the care and the mindfulness, the consideration they give to their job, because their job is affecting so many lives. And young lives, not just those that are out now, but those that might be the next political figure, the next city administrator, the next mayor. And they get it, man. I mean, I can't stress you enough. They just absolutely get it.
That's so good to hear. Derrick, you and your wife got some really exciting news in the last couple of months, and you are expecting your first child, a baby boy, in the spring. So first of all, congratulations. I know I speak on behalf of the Valley that we're all so thrilled for you both. When you sit down with your son, if it's 20 years from now, what do you think you will tell him about this time that we are living in?
That's a really good one. Well, I've never really thought about it. For one, because the fact of being a father is going to be like so new, and like those are conversations that we'll be having. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I look back to like when my parents and my wife's grandmother, like I talked about how she went through. She was in the thick of the civil rights movement and minorities getting the right to vote, and how she talks about it. I hope I'm talking about someone or a group or people that were change agents for the better and did it so that his life could be better, the same way that people before me did it so that I have the opportunities that I have, and that continues. Of course, we're in the thick of it right now, so how it plays out, what the outcome becomes, will probably play a role in how that discussion goes. I can tell you this, because the way that myself and my wife are, she's a social studies teacher, so she she's a brutally honest and lay it on the line. I mean, if it's in the history book, it's in the history book. And she has her feelings about things. I have my feelings about things. Sometimes we line up, sometimes we don't. But we both know, um, we're hopeful that he will be able to sort of ask the right questions and continue to do that, because there's something wrong with asking questions. There's nothing wrong with, again, that goes back to that being informed. When people don't ask and just assume, well, that's not right, because you don't know how that person's feeling or how that turned out. If you ask, yeah, that may conjure up some feelings from the past, but you'll be informed. You'll have an understanding of what it was like back then, 20 years ago, and in 2020, when we thought it was all coming, democracy was dying. But just like the United States is, we figure out a way and we can turn the corner, and it didn't, and it became stronger. That maybe that becomes the conversation. Yeah, I hope he's inquisitive. I hope he's asking, everything. Just, I mean, and I'll admit that wasn't always sort of my mentality to ask. I sort of was always a research of my own and then figure it out. But being on the Valley staff was one of those where we talk things out and we problem solve. You asked a question. That was sort of my first year there on the staff. Was like, I didn't know what I was getting myself into working Arch Madness, but I figured it out by asking questions. And again, it's the same way my position now. I didn't know anything about the inner workings of a school district, but the collaboration, being able to ask the questions, was key in me being able to have any kind of success. But I also had to put myself out there and be visible to say, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. How do I do this? What's the best way of doing this? Who do I talk to? So again, it's that asking questions piece. So again, I'm positive. I'm looking forward to him getting here. And when he starts talking, it could get interesting. It could get very interesting.
Well, we can't wait for the pandemic to be over so we can meet him officially in person.
I'm very sure he will definitely, hopefully in 2021 or 2022, could make his very first trip to Arch Madness and be there to see it all with his own eyes.
As we sort of land this plane, I want to close with a question that I came across it and stole it from President Obama, from back when he was a community organizer. And so he used to ask, how would you describe your world as it is now and how you'd like it to be?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. My world as it is now, my individual world, I think it's stable, but you don't know what others think. But I tend to not worry about what others think. I can't control things I can't control. So I do my best to stay as steady, as balanced as I can. You can drive yourself nuts if you're worrying about things that you can't control. The world as I like it to be, I would like it to be a more tolerant, a more understanding and compassionate world. I think far too often people are worried about things that they can't control, things that they quite honestly shouldn't control, and they want to control them. That's where you get into trouble. And that's where you find yourself stressed, find yourself, in situations that you don't need to be in. When you don't get the answer that you want, that's not how life always works. Sometimes you got to figure out a way to play nicely with others. And I hope we can find a way in this world to play nicely with each other.
Derrick, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to share or add?
Yeah, I definitely want to say I appreciate. I've been following along with what you guys have been doing, and it's been great to hear it, because so often the voices of student athletes and coaches are just left to be just that, just student athletes and coaches. And in the college athletics space, there's few, and I'll include the BCS, not just Missouri Valley leagues, but so few. And I don't think people really understand how few end up being professional athletes. These kids are going on to be have careers in everything else. I keep up with several of the other kids from SAC on Facebook and on Twitter, and they are now athletic trainers and they're physical therapists and they're lawyers. And I mean, I'm just thinking in my head of some of the kids that I've connected with that were on SAC, and those are their careers. I'm like, man, that kid was a golfer at Missouri State, and now he's working in a law office in Kentucky. Like that's what's I've been able to sort of see develop. And this whole series, and it's I don't hate to say the word humanized because we're human, but that's that's what's happening. Like the coaches aren't just coaches; they have a life, they have a family, and their families might be doing something we don't know where they came from. We don't know what they've been through. Their background, their perspective matters. So to hear it from them is a really awesome thing. To hear it from the administrators is a really awesome thing because, again, people that have those voices, people that are in those positions, it goes a long way because we look up to those figures. We can look up to those people regardless of what their position are and what they do. But they're who they are. They're if you're the head basketball coach at school XYZ and kids want to play for you and you tweet funny things, people like you. And guess what? The more and more people like you, the more and more people will listen to what you say, and you have an ear of people and could say something that could make a difference. So there are things being said in this series that are making a difference, regardless of how small or how large they are. But it's important that people can hear the things going forward. So yeah, I appreciate all the work that everyone's doing, and I'll always be following along for as long as the Valley keeps things going forward.
Thank you for the kind words. And yeah, that's by design. They're intentionally not sticking to sports, so to say, because they're much more than student athletes and coaches. They're husbands, their wives, their mothers, their daughters, their sons, their friends, their brothers. And they have a platform and a voice, and they have the opportunity to use it.
Absolutely. That's what it's all about, using that voice for good.
Well, great to see you. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, no problem.